Good evening, fellow engineers, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, as you heard, I'm going to today, unlike most of your uh, question time programs, which deal with specific technical subjects. Today, I have been tasked by your Secretary, Ms. Anand Senra, Engineer Anand Senra, to speak on ethics. He said you can do what you do for the B paper, but I realized B paper, I'm dealing with a totally different group of people, not qualified, highly experienced professional engineers like you gentlemen are, and ladies and gentlemen are. So anyhow, uh, yeah, I will base my presentation on the ISO Code of Ethics, but I will pick certain sub-clauses from each of the clauses which are, I feel, were more relevant to the practice of engineering which you specialists would be performing. Now, very briefly to run over the ISL Code of Ethics, as you may remember from the days when you did this for the B paper, and some of you would have not even done a B paper. You got your charter, like myself, long before the B paper was even thought of. So we have to pick these things up as we go along. The ISL Code of Ethics has 8 clauses, and the clauses are, the first clause deals with people. It's primarily concerned about society and how the engineers treat society and their obligations to the people of the country or the nation or the world. The second clause is upholding the honor of the profession. The third one is that they recognize and ensure that all their engineering works does not impinge or impact adversely on the environment. For too long, engineers have neglected the environment, and now at least we are beginning to take note of that. The fourth clause deals with building up a reputation through their own achievements. The fifth one deals with practicing only in areas of your specialization. The sixth clause deals with loyalty to your employers. The seventh being truthful in reporting. And the eighth clause deals with lifelong learning, CPD. Now, I will touch on, I will deal a little more in depth with these as we go along. But if you look at the international, codes of ethics, a lot of international engineering institutions or associations or whatever you call them. And I have taken, like, for my B paper, I have used like the American Society of Civil Engineers, the ICE, the FIANI, which is the European, and the IEEE. And all those codes of ethics have 7, 8, 9 clauses. But there are 4 clauses that are common to all those in those codes of ethics. And that is the concern about the people, the ones that are having the asterisk, the need to respect the environment, practice in areas of your specialization, and to be involved in lifelong learning. These 4 clauses are reflected in every code of ethics. I looked at the Australian one subsequently, or most of these, and if you look at all the codes of ethics of engineering organizations, institutions, you will find that these 4 are predominantly featured as the main one, as really the foundation for engineering, for professional ethics, yeah, and for the profession. So I will just now run through the code of ethics of the one by one, and we will go through very fast because now the engineering code 1, clause 1 says that engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. That is and proper utilization of funds and other resources in the performance of their professional duty. Basically, you're talking of the people, the safety, health, and welfare of the community, of the people, of the country, right, and globally. Right? And the ISL clause 1 has 9 sub clauses, but I think I'm only going to deal with 4 of them because these are the ones that I think are essential to more practically all engineers, whether they be in any discipline for that matter. Endeavor at all times to maintain engineering services essential to the public. Now, this may not impinge on the structural engineer, but okay, I'll come back to that. They shall work in conformity with recognized engineering standards, which you all know that's how you work. Avoid conflicts of interest and dishonest. You do not do things that are dishonest, right? Which is, I think, common. Basically, from your childhood, you are told not to do things that are dishonest and wrong, and resort to any skullduggery, which will, upset society or the people around you. Now, if you look at the first one, maintain engineering services essential. In Sri Lanka, for example, a lot of our utilities are monopolies. They are controlled by the state. We have electricity, water, fuel, transport, fuel, the railways, all these things are predominantly monopolies controlled by state. And if any one of these, say, if the electricity utilities are disrupted, there will be pandemonium in the country. Similarly with water. Fuel, when there's a petrol or the fuel strike or the CPC goes on strike or they don't run, there is chaos. Similarly, if the rail services go on strike, there is absolute chaos in the country. And this impinges not only on the sort of immediate needs, but it also affects the health, education, the food distribution. All these things are affected. So basically, the country comes to a standstill. And we don't need strikes or any disruption, but the pandemic has disrupted the country and brought us to a standstill to a great extent. But leaving the natural causes like that out of the scene, we will find that we should avoid as engineers to disrupt the life of the community. Some of you may not remember, some of you may not have been born at that time, but somewhere in the 1990s, mid-1990s, the electricity board, the CEB, went on strike for about 4 days on issues of salary and car permits and various other frivolous things, right? I mean, they were important, but they disrupted the whole country. And if they are going to strike, the health services got buckled, a lot of the other manufacturing industries got buckled, water. You see, all these places supposed to have generators, but the generators generally, a lot of these organizations are linked to or run by the CEB. And all this got crippled to a great extent. So it created a lot of hardship for the people. So basically, one thing that is necessary that you do not get involved in anything that will disrupt or inconvenience the community. Standards are something that all engineering, all of us from whether we are electrical, mechanical, civil, or whatever it is, we have our engineering design revolves around standards. So I'm not going to spend too much time with this, because standards are something that you have been using from the day you got into university, and all your design work revolves around the use of standards and the codes. The British standards was the regular thing for us until very recently, but now Euro standards and there are other standards that are being used, which are more advanced and more specific to the current needs of the development of the engineering technologies. So I'm just going to skip to the standards and codes, because this is old hat for you, and I know in my time this maybe for the undergrad or it's okay, but at this point of time, I don't think there's any justification in wasting time on this. But the one thing which I want to deal with is that is the standard of care. Now, I don't know whether this is something that I came across very recently in the course of my preparation of the lectures for university. The standard of care is something which we, I don't think has been, or maybe you may be knowledgeable, but I'm not sure. Now, in all, basically, all our professional obligations conform for us to do work to standard operating procedures and regulations when we do our designs or carrying out the installations or whatever it is, right? And that is what we are doing. But there may arise unforeseen problems that the standard procedures and regulations are not well equipped to handle. Now, this is where, in such a situation, the engineer has to satisfy a more demanding norm, the standard of care. And the standard of care really comes with your thinking out of the box, right? And with your experience. Now, just to give very briefly to touch on this, you see, for example, the building codes of a country, of a town, of an area, of a district or a town, or it may have certain features, but you can have an unusual, like unforeseen situation where you have maybe a seismic activity, for example, which we are not designing for very much here. But with the new buildings coming up, that becomes relevant. But there are situations, and when I give you the example, you will realize the value of this. The standard of care, where you find something that is not taken account, you are not taken into account, but which, if it were to happen, based on your accepted design, which complies with all the the national standards, then you're running into a problem. Because this type of particular situation cannot be anticipated from all angles. And application of the standard of care requires professional judgment. That's why I said this is something that comes with your experience and the wide range of work that you do. And you then realize that there are certain things which can apply, certain factors that can apply in a particular situation to your design, which could be detrimental. So I've brought in an example later on, which we will see. The other one in the clause 1 is a conflict of interest. Basically, you are working for a particular part. You are employed by somebody, or a client or an employer, and you work in his interest. Now, you don't do things that will go against the your employer or your client, or against the public. And if there are issues that come up, you are supposed to inform your client about such a situation. For example, like when in some of the major projects, I'm taking the example of highway projects, right? Where the RDA does the road design, the highway design, but the bridges are given on a design and build to the contractor. For this particular project. Now, the contractor can approach engineer in the organization and say, can you do the design for me? Because he knows that if it's done by engineer within that the client organization, he will have the contracts to get the design passed without any hassle. Whereas if he gets it done by independent consultant, then he may run into a problem, or he may have to answer more questions. So, but this creates a conflict of interest, because if you are working for an organization and somebody asks you to do a design which is going to be used by that organization and which has been checked out by one of your colleagues, you don't get involved in that. You stay clear of it. So, and also this to take the concept of the conflict of interest a bit further, right? Now, professional has a role. and he's expected to exercise good judgment on behalf of the employer or the client. But sometimes he has additional side interest that could threaten good judgment.
Hello.
And in which case he may tend. He may tend to be more interested in looking after his side interest, which may be a little more lucrative than looking after the interests of his clients. And some of these areas where these side interests come up are, you can, for example, you can be hired by a competitor of your client to be a consultant for them also. Now, this is totally unethical. You shouldn't be doing that. It is unprincipled, but that has happened. These situations do pop up. You may be having a personal interest. You may have invested in a competitor's company. I mean, these are maybe improbable, sound improbable, but these happen. Right? Then bribes, gifts, and kickbacks are again things that are there. Nobody wants to talk too much about it, but they are there in the background of practically everything that happens. And passing of insider information, that is, if you are, when you are in a senior position and you are privy to a lot of important decisions in your company, and if you know that, for example, your company is going to the stock exchange and to launch a new, to open a further, invite further investments, you can tell some of your buddies, okay, you better invest, this is coming up next month, you better invest promptly because this is going to be a good return, this is a good project. Now, you are not so technically insider information, and passing of insider information is not acceptable under the Securities Act. And if you are caught, and people have been caught and prosecuted for this type of issues. So gifts, bribes and kickbacks, I'm not going to deal with bribes. We know what bribes are, we know what gifts are. But kickbacks are something that happens in the construction industry. I mean, let's face it, these are things that happen. May not be at different levels. Maybe that when you are checking the some mid-level officer is checking the delivery of some material, the quantity of materials and things like that. This thing, and they certify the full quantity, though there is a percentage less, and then they share the difference. So this type of thing happens, or you are given something to pass the bills or invoices. So what kickbacks, so these are things that you have to be aware of and and see where you can, and if you come across it, take steps to prevent it. Because as structural engineer, you may be more involved in the design and design and but when it comes to the, sometimes you may also be involved, you already have some input, or when you visit the sites, you may find, checking on various things, that you do have situations where there are various unethical practices taking place. And this is where I think as engineers, as professionals, we have to look after the interest of our clients and our organization. And these ultimately impinge on the community and the country. This is, I just put this as an example of an interesting case where an American professor in West Coast, maybe somewhere in California, where it was, he used the grant funds of $144,000 to purchase electronic equipment from a company he owned in part. So he had investment in that company. Fine. He did not reveal his ownership to the university. Now, this is what you are supposed to do right at the beginning. If you have an interest in an organization and they want to buy and they're going to tender for the supply of anything or for a particular activity, you have to inform that these people are known to you, right? He priced his equipment higher than the market value. This is a smart guy, right? And some of the purchased items were never received because it's bad enough selling them at a higher price. Some of them never even came, so, but he got the money for it. Right? The required documentation had been submitted as required, but with falsified content. So every stage there is some unethical activity. And remind you, this is a a professor, a very highly respected person. Right? In addition, the professor had a brother and two sisters, right, for several years, and but concealed their relationship to him in violation of anti-nepotism rules. Now, in the West, even going back so many years, and nepotism rules were there. There was in Sri Lanka, these don't apply. To be quite honest, every parliamentarian, every minister has half his family in serving as employed as various secretaries and various whatever it is at state expense. So nepotism does not mean very much in our country, but these are the things that matter, right? And these are the things that help to make a just society. All told, he defrauded the university of over $5,000. We are talking of maybe about 10 years ago. Now it must be much more in research funds. He never did any research either. And he was, he was charged and he was, kicked out finally. But this is the type of thing that could happen. And this is why you have to guard against any such thing that like this if it comes up. And if you are also, if you get to know, whistleblowing is something that you need to do to alert the authority that there is something not quite correct happening. Conflict of interest, you don't disclose confidential information, again, like this doggy who is apparently the financial advisor in the pet care company. He's saying that there's a good prospect in pet care stocks. So he's advising a buddy of his to invest. And the other area, the clause in the sub-clause in clause 1 is the waste or misappropriation of public funds. Because a lot of the work that we do involves public or even private, the investments of various people, right? And we are not supposed to waste that money. In our situation, where at one time we were getting a lot of funding from overseas, from grants and loans, waste of money and waste of resources was a crime. Right? A misappropriation was still worse, because misappropriation was when you actually falsified. You falsified documentation, people falsified documentation, they falsified various records and siphoned part of the funds that should have been used for the development work into their private accounts. So this type of thing is something that we should avoid. So these are the basic clauses, 4 important sub-clauses out of the 9 clauses which occur in clause 1 of the ISO Code of Ethics. Clause 2 says you should maintain the honor of the profession. And I think as engineers, as respected people in the society, we should maintain that level of honesty and integrity, so that we do not bring the esteem of the profession down to a low level. Today with the media, social media, one slip on your part and this goes viral. Everybody will be talking about it, and even if before they prove the facts, they will publish it. All they need is a hint that, okay, somebody did something wrong, and that will be published. So be very careful. We are engineers. We have come up to this position the hard way, right? We have got a free education. I would say 95% of us have got a free education, which is something that we have to value and honor and respect, right? So we have to maintain the level of the engineer as being one of the top professions in this country and in the world. So much for clause 2. Clause 3 is again environment, right? You have to be aware of all the adverse environmental impacts that engineering works can have on the environment. And the first way is to develop environment to ensure a proper to take note of the environmental impacts and incorporate practical remedial measures. To analyze proposed new applications, new technologies that are applied to various projects. Here again, out of the about 6 clauses, I'm only going to touch on like 3 clauses. Reuse, minimize or reuse waste and and also practice safe disposal, right? And conservation. Again, as I'm saying, as maybe a structural engineer, you may not be directly confronted with some of these issues, but these are as people who are working as sites, civil engineers who are working in sites and ranges and on construction sites will cause these problems. So here again, environmental impact assessment is one of the most important things, and every project, every major project requires an environmental impact assessment. Environmental laws, there are the laws, the cooperation between cross-border technologies and all that is fine. New technologies, again, it's not really relevant to you all because new technologies that are applied, we have to see that they are not harmful to people or the environment and minimize the reuse of waste and conservation. So EIA, now you all are most of you all are familiar with environmental impact assessments, and every major project that has to be done requires an EIA. Regrettably, sometimes these are bypassed or ignored or, shall I put it, fudged. And I think there were allegations at one time that the some that I think was it for the some aspects of the Colombo Port City issue were not properly addressed when the EIS was prepared because the government in power at that time wanted this to be pushed through. The bigger fault lay in the Umawa. The Umawa, the EIA was never prepared till 2 years after the project started. And here again, the problem was that the donors, the first they went to the ADB turned it down because there were problems with, possible impacts on the environment. As you know, the Umawa has caused a lot of trouble. Then they went to JICA also turned it down. And then, of course, finally, the Chinese or the Iranians are happy to take it on. So the Iranians took it on, EIAs don't mean nothing to them. And they went ahead and did it. And then, now, that's been a major problem. There have been water shortages in the Bandaraval, in the Uva provinces. There have been collapses, there's a huge leak in the tunnel. Right? And all this is because there was no proper detailed EIA done to assess the possible potential problem that could arise when implementing the project. And finally, I think they got a stay. One of the leading state universities to churn out not an engineering faculty, but another faculty, to churn out EIA 2 years after and that was published. And there were a lot of protests from various communities and farming organizations, and all, but they just ignored the whole thing and went ahead with it. And now that's a disaster. Then application of new technologies, this is something again which you have to make sure that it does not adversely affect the environment or the health and safety of the public, really not relevant to the structural engineering, but things like, for example, in telecom, for example, 5G, there are still uncertainties about the pluses and the minuses of the use of 5G. There are people who advocate and say it's perfectly safe. There are people who say that no, there are issues, and there are countries and cities that have refused 5G, and there are people who have accepted it. So these things have to be cleared up and not rushed into until you are quite sure that it's not going to harm the community. Reuse of waste and safe disposal, I think this really all building sites, all major engineering, civil engineering, construction sites have this. And you have the building or the construction waste and the waste generated, the structural waste and the waste generated from finishing, right? So basically, these things are things that maybe your people who are going to be site engineers, the younger engineers will start off as site engineers and then go into the more specialized areas, need to think of. And if you are focusing or if you're working mainly in the project in a large company involving construction work, you, and as a senior level, as a project manager or as a site, as a chief engineer of a site or of a project, you have to make sure that these areas are addressed, and also the disposal. The disposal is done in a organized way and to a acceptable landfill or whatever way it's done area. So you can recycle the concrete. And for example, even the waste from the Norochole plant, for example, a lot of the sludge that comes out from the boilers were just piling up. And then I think fortunately recently some of our engineers, I think, and some universities have found a way of converting the sludge into a brick building blocks or bricks that can be used for construction. And I think that is a very laudable, uh, you know, initiative, because that's something that helps to get rid of these tons and tons of stuff that was just piling up. And of course, conservation. We have to be conserved. We are talking now of going into renewables. On the one area that do as a structural engineer, building and civil engineers get involved is in the design of green buildings and the design of structures for green buildings. And I think that is a great thing. And if we can keep that going, but these are not things that you can rush into. We just sometimes our leaders make statements saying we are going green or we want renewables from, and overnight they expect you can't. Like our agriculture, you have to plan it and phase it in the new concept and phase out the old, but not rush into. But these are renewable. For example, fossil fuels, we have a limited life cycle. We are talking of like 100 years for fuel oils, for coal, 100 years for coal, and about 50 odd years for gas and fuel and liquid fuels. So these things have to be phased out, and renewables have to become the mainstay of our economy. So clause 4. I hope I'm not going too fast because I'm just trying to get through some of this stuff. This is really, you should develop your reputation on your own merit and don't compete unfairly. This is something that happens, quite unfortunately, something that happens in our society. Because if you want to apply for a job you will see whom you can approach, or your father knows somebody, if it's a younger engineer, if he knows the chairman, or if he knows the director in a company, or somebody as the minister, if it's a state employment, they will go that way rather than going through the factor that go and be evaluated fairly. So you don't resort to that type, or sometimes even there are cases where people have offered, various inducements to the people who matter to get selected or to get into a particular position. So don't do, there are 10 clauses in this one, right? There are 10 clauses, and it also deals with things like, malicious talk. We are famous for kalapatras, and now with social media, you can, if you want to, destroy the reputation of an engineer and get into his job, you can put all sorts of garbage on the social media, right? You don't do that type of thing. But I'm just taking this one is bribery. You don't offer inducement, and the other thing is for your own, to safeguard the reputation of the profession. Do not resort to plagiarism. A lot of you who have to do designs or to write reports, sometimes this has become a fairly common thing now. But fortunately, now the mechanism to check whether there's plagiarism occurring is also there, so that you can get caught out fairly easily. And also intellectual property rights, acknowledge if you're taking the work, basing your design or your calculation or what is on somebody else's, a particular section done by somebody else, acknowledge that. sometimes you may have to write and get uh, permission, or else at least even in your, you make a specific statement acknowledging that you have used this person's knowledge to reach your final your conclusions. So again, I mean, I don't need to go into definitions of plagiarism and deal with intellectual property rights. So these are things that you all know, and I think uh, this is an important one. Clause 5, right? Engineers perform professional services only in areas of their competence. So in the past, as you know, they shall undertake assignment only when qualified by education experience and technical, in specific technical fields involved. And then it goes on, and then the next one is you don't sign anything unless you are sure of what has been done. So competence, you shall undertake work only when you are qualified by education and experience in the specific technical fields involved. Now, as you know, in the past, maybe many years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, if for the purpose of getting your building permit, any chartered engineer could sign. So you might have an electrical engineer signing a building plan, or mechanical engineer, or whatever it is. Right? But now in the research, I think over the last 10, 20 years, 15 years, the authorities have become more specific and say that, okay, building plans have to be signed by a civil engineer. And when it comes to buildings, you know that with the heights of buildings going up to the sky, right, there are certain limitations on what you can sign and what you can't sign. Anyhow, so I think as you all know, the ISL certifies engineers, structural engineers, and gives them the license or the authority to practice up to certain level. So 0 to, or say 1 to 4 floors, practically any civil engineer, chartered civil engineer can be involved in the design of that. From the intermediate stage, from say 5 to 8, you will have to get yourself certified by the IESL. 9 to 12, which is mid-rise, I think again the same process. 13 to 20, which is high-rise, same. And greater than 20, the high-rise unlimited. So all these you have to go through a series of tests and evaluations and interviews, and then you are certified to practice in that particular range of building or design and construction also. So if you are, for example, if you are in the high range, the high range from 13 to 20, and one of your friends who is a property developer is going to put up a 25 or 30-story, and he says, look, can you come and help me and do the design? And he offers you a good package. You should have the tell him, look, I cannot do this because I am not certified to do beyond that. I can go to 20 floors, yes. Beyond that, you have to get another person. But you can always tell him, look, if the required, if more qualification and experience are required outside, then you can tell him that you can get one of your colleagues who is qualified in that range, in the greater than 20 range, right? In the high unlimited range, and he can assist, and you can also work with him, so they all get something out of it, some benefit out of it, and the experience that you will get working with someone who has that experience is a great thing, and it helps you to later on maybe to go get yourself upgraded to the unlimited range. So basically, but don't try to do something that is beyond your level of competence. because this is where things can go wrong. Because if something were to happen, right, and there is a failure, then you are going to get into, and there is investigation, and I hope people do things serious, take things seriously here. It doesn't seem to be happening, but if you do, uh, then you are going to be in deep trouble. So always stick to your knowledge, your speciality. I mean, at the time when we graduated many years ago, you were sort of jack of all trades. You got involved in everything. But now you're becoming more and more focused, right? And you are becoming like from the basic electrical, mechanical, civil. Now your civil has structural, water supply, and each person, sewerage, irrigation. Each person works in his particular area, geotechnical, whatever it is. Similarly, electrical and mechanical. So you don't go outside your narrow bandwidth of expertise, because things are much more, and the same, even the medical profession, those days, doctors were sort of, again, they looked at everything, but a surgeon, for example, was a general surgeon. He cut you up from top to bottom. Right? But now you have very specialized areas of surgery in medicine. So you don't, as technology improves, as knowledge improves, you find that you need to have this specialized experience to do this. And you don't fix your signature on any document unless you have thoroughly you're sure of what is in it. Because sometimes somebody, a friend might come and ask you and say, can you sign this building plan, or can you sign this particular document which has to submit to the municipality for with the engineering bias. For example, you want CEDA recognition, you have to give the list of your equipment that you have. Unless you are sure and you can that you are verified for yourself, don't sign, because if something goes wrong, you are in trouble. This cartoon is just the earlier one, where the newsman refers the anchorman normally refers to the person who does the weather report. But here the weather report has been, one man says I only talk about temperature, the other guy says I'm only talking about humidity, and third person says I only talk of barometric pressure. So they're taking this specialization to an extreme, but it really doesn't happen that way. But this is just to drive home the point that these things can become very, very specialized, and people can be found fault with if you poke your nose into something that you don't know or not. Clause 6. This is again another one that has about 8 to 9 or 10. I think it has 9 subclauses. If you're employed by somebody, work for him and work honestly for him. He's paying you your salary. He's looking after your well-being. You have to be honest to him, unless he does something that is going to go contrary to the well-being of society. And so when you're working on, you get paid by one party for the services, and you don't get payment from other people. If somebody is offering you to, and I want you to do some consultancy, then tell your boss, look, I've been asked by this particular person to do a job for him to do some work, and is it okay if I do it? And he's agreed to pay me a fee for this. And if he says, okay, it's not going to conflict with anything that we have at the moment, then okay. But always avoid that type of situation unless you make it known to your employer or your client. This is another issue that comes up. Neither solicitor accept financial or the valuable consideration, including free engineering designs from material or equipment suppliers. Now, this is something that may not happen in the in the general, civil engineering, but in case in some areas like building services, where they have a special areas like some of the sub-disciplines like air conditioning, vertical transportation, fire protection, these are relatively new, and actually even the university courses don't properly, I think air conditioning now is reasonably well covered, deal with. And you would find some organization that's involved in the import of machinery come and telling you, look, I will give you a design for the air conditioning for this particular building that you're working on, and you're going to call for tenders. And if I will do the total design, but you include it in your BOQ and your specifications, so that when you do that, that guy is going to get the job because nobody else can match the specifications. But you are unfair by your client, you're unfair by your employer, because there may be better options, more energy efficient, more environmentally sound equipment that can be used. But by specifying virtually, by tailor making the your specs to deal with one particular type of equipment, you are creating a some situation where nobody else can compete. So you have to avoid that kind of situation, and you can now that you can always go to the university or any good consultants firm and get a person who can do the design for you for these things, and ensure that independent design and specifications can be prepared for that particular branch of engineering. Conviction. Again, this is something that can come up. You can be costed because now, if your client, like I said, if he wants to do, you must be faithful to your client. But if he's trying to do something that will go against the interest of the public, then you have to bring it to the notice. You advise him to stop it. Otherwise, you have to inform the authorities. And one situation like this is that if, for example, you are, I think yesterday or day before they said that they're giving lots of money to the provinces and the regions for development. Whatever reason, they are doing that, right? Now, if somebody wants to build a factory, and so in one of these areas, and say, okay, that provide employment and all this type of thing, lift the quality of life there. And if they do that, and if that is going to have an impact on the community, then you have to tell your person, not your employer or your client, that this is not on. Just as an example, for example, when we're in Southern Expressway, we have, there are a lot of underpasses, and I was at ECL. I was involved in the last bit of the project going from Kurunga Sakma to Wall. Now, one of those, when you go under, there's a stream flowing by the side of the underpass, and it's smelling of acetic acid. Why? There's a rubber factory close by, and the acetic acid that is used to coagulate the latex and form the rubber sheet, and the rubber sheets and they are washed after they have been rolled out. All that effluent water goes into the stream. Now the people downstream of that factory are going to get affected. There are villagers who are bathing there. They're collecting their water for their cooking. There are animals that are being drinking from, and there are lots of problems that can arise. So you have to tell him that, look, this is not on. Let's spend a little more money and do a treatment plant where we can ensure that the water that goes out into the river is clean water. It's something that complies with the international, with the Sri Lanka Standards Institution water quality standards. Similarly, effluents from emissions from stacks, from boilers and things, make sure that those are all compliant. Otherwise, there's no dust and all this is going out. Right? So if you have the conviction that that is wrong, what he's doing, you have to tell him and convince him to fall in line with doing the right thing. And confidentiality. Now, a lot of you are going to end up, handling more and more confidential information. Because the more senior you become, the more trusted you are in the organization. And you are entrusted with a lot of material and information that is of value, maybe to a competitor. Now, a competitor can approach you and try to get that out of you. Right? He may offer you good prices, good maybe gifts, maybe offering sometimes even a trip abroad or whatever it is, but they will try to extract that information from you. Especially if you're preparing a tender, they will want to know to see what your company is quoting so that they can try to undercut your firm. So you don't do it. You are loyal to your employer. He is the man who provides your bread and butter, right? And you don't change. So basically, this is these out of these I've dealt with these aspects of the and I'm going to really conflict of interest. Again, you see in the States, the the uh, that cartoon really shows the doctor is telling the man, I'm prescribed these drugs because I have a stock in that company that makes the drugs. I think they have to tell. Here we don't tell. We happily get all the kickbacks from the pharmaceuticals, from big pharma, and then we carry on. So then you don't get involved in this type of thing. You keep a clean sheet, and so that the profession does not suffer. And you see, these are all, I've all dealt with all these things of free engineering, designs and drawings. You don't get paid by more people. Yeah. Gifts and kickbacks. You don't accept any, you know. But this one thing I want to show is that bribery is considered very seriously by foreign companies who are working with. Again, this depends on what country you are coming from. But for example, this is Roughton. No, actually, Roughton were the consultants for the Southern Expressway, the Kurmuka Hasak state, and they were very particular. And they gave all of us had to go study this. Those of us who were involved at a higher level at ECL, the British Bribery Act of 2010, which really dealt with let's run through this. I just pick on one. Basically, this deals with bribery or what can be termed bribery in either bribing another person, being bribed, right? Bribing foreign public officers, because this is, you see, a lot of when these people are dealing mainly on government to government countries, ADB or World Bank or British government or USA or the JICA or whatever it is, the government agencies are funding the local, are providing funds to the local government, to our government. And over here, so if you look at this global, say, from the developed to the developing countries, and bribing of foreign public officials is something that happens. So this is something that again can be found fault with. And the failure of commercial organizers prevent bribery. And they actually, this has a lot of there are a lot of areas, but I won't go into all this. But one area that they also touch on is hospitality. So see, we think uh, it's quite okay if we getting back to the screens. If we sort of take out people for dinner and have a good bust up somewhere and get sozzled and but the British Bribery Act is very, very specific, other than for very low level or very relatively mild forms of hospitality and entertainment. US Bribery Act allows this type of thing. Hospitality is permitted. Spending and is not considered a part of bribery. So there, it's very interesting to go through these and find the time to delve into this type of thing, how each country looks at it. Okay. So conviction, confidentiality, I've dealt with all these areas, confidentiality. You don't disclose public information, right? And to, one issue that with confidence is that if you're changing jobs, now I don't know how the thing applies in Sri Lanka, but in most developed countries, if you change your job, you cannot see the knowledge you have gained has to remain with you. You cannot go and pass it on to your new employer. Sometimes because quite often people might hire you because you're involved in some special R&D that's going on there. And they would like to get you in there because it will help them to compete for some major projects. And this thing happened. There's a very good case where when the US space uh, they were working towards trying to send a man to the moon. There was BF Goodrich. BF Goodrich was they were very big in the rubber industry. They were developing space suits. And one of the leading people in that design team he was unhappy with the place. He wanted to get a salary or increase or whatever it is. He was picked up by a place called International Latex Corporation, which was a relatively newer place, and who also competing for the space suits. So BF Goodrich went to courts and we sought legal action to stop him from joining these people, and also for divulging the secrets of what he knew, the trade secrets that he had learned. But so the court ruled that they can't stop him from changing jobs. That's the freedom that he has. He can change his jobs, he can go wherever he wants. But he cannot divulge the trade secrets of BF Godrej to the new employer. It's a rather how you really practice and implement this and unless you monitor these things, you can do it. But finally, International Latex Corporation got the contract for spacesuits. And recently on Discovery, there was an interesting program where they just I suddenly heard the name International Latex being mentioned, and they talked about the development of the spacesuits for the first set of astronauts that went out to the moon. So that's for this type of ruling says the clear illustration of the way in which the professional integrity of the engineer is shown, much more than loyalty to the present employer. So you have to safeguard the information you got from your previous employer and not divulge it to the present man. How practically this can be monitored and controlled, I don't know. But anyhow, that's how it works. And you can retire because because of that, this cartoon is just funny on that. You can't retire because you know too much. You might talk. So this old guy, you can see the very old gentleman, he's being kept on because they're not allowing him to retire because he knows too much information. Clause 7 is about being truthful. Please, whenever you have to make a statement, you have to go to courts, be truthful in what you say, because if you go and tell a lie and you get caught out, especially when it comes to legal or arbitration or one of the major issues, you get into problems, you discredit your company and you discredit the profession of the engineer. So don't ever try to resort to giving false testimony and false information. Only talk on the basis of adequate knowledge and technical competence. And if you are being opposed by somebody to make false statements, then you have to inform your client or your owner or the authority that somebody is trying to tap you for this. And the final clause, I'm sorry, this is going a bit longer than I expected, is CPD. CPD, everybody has to, engineering is not a dead science. It doesn't stop with what you learn when you get out of the university. Lifelong learning is a must. What I learned when I was 50 years ago at Peradeniya is now obsolete, right? Mechanical engineering has changed from the nuts and the bolts and the cams and gear wheels to world of mechatronics, right? And unless you keep abreast with that, you don't electrical, electronics, telecommunication, your structural designs, and the technologies that are used, as that the chemicals that are used, all this has changed. So you have to keep abreast with the latest technology, right? And that's the only way that you can continue to be of use in the profession. And also remember that you must always develop your subordinates, because you have to create a second layer. I have come across cases where people don't like to develop the next their subordinates because they think that they might be smarter than them because they are younger, they are smarter, they are like more knowledgeable in their new technologies. But remember that you are working for somebody and you have to retire at some point in time. You may migrate, you may go abroad, you may get another job and go, but the company has to go on. So you have to think in terms of the well-being of your organization and with that, the profession. So always develop your subordinates, help them even to prepare for the charter, to get through their designs, to prepare their study for the B paper and all that type of stuff, and for them to do well as professional engineers so that they will in turn look after their subordinates when they come to them. And of course, this was a bit of sales talk that the ISL has put in, that you should get involved with the institution. And I think a lot of people are involved through the various civil engineering sectional committees and mechanical and electrical sectional committees and so many other organizations. So basically that concludes. Have I got a few more, maybe another 15 or 20 minutes to carry on?
Sure, sir, please go ahead.
Examples, I mean, I don't know, because these are things that really you people most probably are much more familiar with. The excellency building collapse. I was trying to find in Sri Lanka, the only things I could find major engineering disasters where there was an ethical angle was this excellency building and the Candy building. And so the excellency building, you are aware of this one that well behind the Savoy, the building that collapsed. And apparently, I mean, original design was for the idea was to build a 10-story building, but finally the drawings that were sent for approval were for a 4th-story. That is 2 basements, a ground and a first floor. And the ground and the first floor will be reception halls. But after the building collapsed, they found that there were over the 2 ground floors, there were 3 more floors coming out on top. And here there were 2 floors. So there were like 5 floors on the front half of the building and 4 floors on the other. And this was built on the embankment of the canal, right? So there was the issue of possible reasons for the failure due to additional dead weight by all these additional floors and also the building materials on it. The foundation was designed for the original 4 floors. Now, and but on top of that, they put 3 more on top and two at the rear. And what soil tests were done, there was no design or no so enhancing of the foundations or the construction or any further piling or anything done, but just on the existing foundation they built. They go due to construction material and the lack of competence of the structural engineer. The structural engineer was found to be an associate member of the ISL who was not even a chartered, who should have been a chartered engineer at least, and also specialized in with structural certification, but he was so the ethical issues that really come up is the client illegally adding floors and not getting approval. Now this is something that seems to be happening fairly frequently in our part of the world. Even in there was a major building collapse in Dhaka, in Pakistan, where I think the whole building collapsed because there had been number of floors that could be added over and above. So where is the fault? I mean, the client can do this, the developer can do this, but where are the authorities? Authorities need to be to monitor and keep a track of what's happening. The lack of consideration of the level of risk and the safety of life and property. Like obviously, the client was not bothered about, and this was going to be a reception hall. Now the building collapsed, and they were getting ready for a reception that evening. And if it had collapsed with when all those people were there, with families, women, children, and all the people, the whole over 100 to 250 people, there the deaths and the injuries were much more severe. Because this happened in the morning when only the workers were there and 2 people died, which is still not acceptable, and about 25 got injured. The engineer acting beyond his level of competence, which is really you only work in areas that you are competent to. The contractor undertaking work that had not been authorized and approved by the local authority. The contractors also should be careful. So they should not take unnecessary risk of getting involved in any building unless the proper authorizations are there. And there was the local authority. This would have been the Colombo municipality or the UDI. So there were supposed to be investigations done, but whatever came of those, I don't know. Maybe some of the gentlemen may be more aware of the history of this after the post-collapse situation. Because as we know, it looks like everything has got swept under the carpet. This is the tragedy with things that happen here. These are the pictures of that building collapse into the canal. And at the Candy building also, this was again a built on extremely steep slope. There's supposed to be water channels under it, the water passages, and apparently sorry, I think it was really 3 floors, but they had added additional floors again. And the thing is, the CEDA, when the NBRO, when they investigated, said that the contractors have not used concrete and steel bars properly. I'm not quite sure what that means, but obviously there has been the design may specify, for example, steel bars of say maybe grade 40 concrete, and they may use grade 20 or 30, whatever it is. And bars, instead of, if you specify 12 millimeter, they may put 8 millimeter. I don't know. So obviously there was something fishy that happened. And also the land, it was for the land that was built, and the fact that all this should have been researched and taken into consideration when the design was done, so that the suitable foundations and suitable building could be designed to be built on that type on that steep slope. And the CEDA, what CEDA said was that the failure in integrity, official due diligence, lack of official due diligence, and building standards. So basically were the main contributors. So that really boils down to the contractor, the developer to a point. Developer passes the buck to the contractor and the local authorities. See, when after somewhere the reading, the local authorities, we didn't know, we didn't go to check these out. So that is their problem. Or they say they don't have enough staff or whatever, some flimsy excuse, but they have to be at least once in 6 months, even visit the site and see. You can do it once in 3 months or something, so much the better. So again, the CEDA highlights the original design was for 2 stories. Yeah, it was 2 stories, and the foundation that accordingly. Additional 3 levels have been added. Sorry, that's the earlier one. This is what I was trying to say. Building was built on sandy soil, having subterranean waterways. The design was inadequate for the extra loads. The construction company was not registered with CEDA. Now again, here the contract nowadays all contractors should be registered with CEDA, and they are graded according to their resources and their capabilities. But these people were obviously not. Official monitoring of the construction, including site inspection, was lacking. So at the end of the day, what CEDA says is that the need the need for all clients, builders, and consultants and contractors to adopt ethical practices. That is what was lacking. And this is something that we have to make sure as engineers involved in construction in the building sector, whether you are designing or contract or in the implementation, that everybody follows and observes good ethical practices which are set out in the ISA Code of Ethics to a great extent. Okay, and now I'll just run on to the last one, which is and these are the pictures. This is the building before it collapsed, and this is after it collapsed. And unfortunately, a young couple and their infant child were killed when this building collapsed. The Citicorp building in New York. This, I don't know whether you all have studied this case earlier or whether someone has highlighted this, but this was a very interesting case, which again I found very useful for trying to get the concept. And this really brings out the concept of the standard of care. Standard of care in now the Citicorp was, you can see it's a unique structure. The design is totally, out of this world. It has a angle 45-degree top and rises something like 915 feet. And the bottom here is 114 feet between the ground level and the lowest floor. And is supported on the four columns that support it are in the middle, not at the ends, which would be the standard practice. And the reason they did this was because there is an old church behind here, some a Greek Orthodox church or something like that. And they said that, okay, you can build this building here, but the church must be visible. Otherwise, the church would have been totally hidden. So the designer, the architects, was a guy person called Stu Stubbings, and Le Mercier was a structural engineer. They decided that they will put this up. Actually, the designer, the architect designed it, but the structural engineer really is the guy who had to do the hard work, because he has to do the life or death depends on his calculation. So he did the design and they went ahead and built it. And the building was a steel superstructure, 25 tons, which was lighter than most of the similar skyscrapers. And because of the lightweight building sway, there was a concern that for heavy wind loads which were experienced in New York, the building could sway, and sway could be fairly serious. So they had tuned mass damper, which was hidden in that angled, 45-degree angle portion on the top. And this was the first of its kind which was implemented in the US. And this damper, was like a 400-ton block of concrete floating on a film of oil and was computer controlled to absorb the energy of the swaying structure, and reduce the building's wind-induced movement by as much as 50%. So this was a unique building, and it was a really, something out of this world. Now the wind loading, as per the New York building codes, were for the building being hit with the wind face on, perpendicular to the faces of the building. So the design was totally for a 90-degree impact on the face of the building. Building joints were incorporated in the design, but the steel contractor said that they could use bolted joints, which would still meet the design requirement and would be cheaper. So Le Mercier's team studied this and they said, okay, fine, go ahead with bolted joints instead of welded joints. Now, because this was the iconic building, this was the center of a lot of projects and courseworks and whatever it is, and just the student community and amongst architects as well as engineering students. And girl, one student, doing her own calculations, found that quartering means the winds that hit the building at an angle, say 45 degrees. If the, now the New York building code allows for vertical impact, or not vertical, I mean perpendicular impact. But if the wind were to hit it at an angle at 45 degrees, the whole scenario changes. And also because of the support is such being in the middle and not in the end, the building would become very, very dangerous if there were like cyclonic type winds, which happen in New York. Because you know the whole of the east coast of US gets hammered by cyclones and tornadoes and all sorts of things like that. Right? I mean, and although the Florida and Carolina and areas like that get affected, Louisiana, it also works up the coast, and New York also gets a fair amount. So somehow this girl managed to get this message across to Lemercier. I mean, really, she had contacted spoken to one of his assistants in his office, and he had told, and he, whatever it is, he had the humility to recheck his designs. I mean, this I thought was a great thing, which a lot of our people might not want to do. Here is some 40 little undergrad, not even a graduate, telling you that quartering winds are much more significant than than what you are designed for. And that's why he found that the boulder joints were inadequate. And given hurricane condition, the collapse of the building was a possibility. And if that building collapsed with thousands of people in it, it would have been a major disaster for the people in the building and also the surrounding areas as usual, including the little church. So what did Lemercier do? He straight away he acknowledged the fact that okay, there was a mistake on his part. He advised the client, his architect, the client's lawyer, the client's insurer, everybody that there is this problem. We have to change. Advise City Corp, the building owner. Advise the city authorities. Install backup generators for the tune mass damper, because if there's a power failure and that thing, stops when there's heavy winds, there's going to be a problem. Retained a team of meteorological experts to determine the risk of damaging windstorms, right? So they were constantly checking to see any risk of. He issued a repair plan, whereas bolted joints were reinforced with welded joints, welded by welding plates. He developed an emergency evacuation plan for the area within a 5-block radius involving 2,000 Red Cross volunteers. You will see the extent to which he personally got involved in preparing for the disaster. Now, if 9/11 people knew something like this was they were going to get hit, they could have prepared something similar, but they didn't, and they didn't know what was going to happen. Created a cover story. But now, as far as the public were concerned and the press were concerned, there was a cover story saying that the nighttime work has been done because there are changes in the New York building code. And the New York building code changed after this incident. So, but he took a lot of trouble to ensure that everything was okay. The ethical issue that he whistleblew on himself. He did not try to hide his errors, but came out in the open and took the responsibility for the flawed design. It cost him a lot of money by way of insurance and various things. You go to a web, you'll find a whole lot of information. Right. And basically, he upheld the health, safety, and the welfare of the public. I paid attention to the comments of an undergraduate student. He had the humility to accept that, right? And having the humility to reevaluate his design, Lemercier ensured that the City Corp building was saved. Lemercier Act highlights the importance associated with constantly questioning and re-examining past decisions in the light of new information or ideas. Design profession must be open to other ideas. You have to think out of the box. This is where the standard of care comes in, right? Perspective and criticism while avoiding a stubborn attachment to existing beliefs. And a lot of us, unfortunately, want to stick with our fixed ideas. We don't want to move out. We are comfortable with what we know, but we don't want to accept something new. So So actually the New York building codes were changed in the early 70s. New York building code, building codes other than those produced by beams at right angles. This is the 1970s. Until a new code in the late 1968, where they changed, I think this is 1998, sorry, my mistake, was required all structures, release structural frame, horizontal wind presence from any direction. So rather than having perpendicular, the codes were changed to accept wind force from any direction. So Lamasya, he became highly respected because of this, and he was a lecturer at Harvard. He was anyhow lecturing at Harvard and all the top engineering universities. This is something that applies to all of us, engineers, as we serve the community. You have a social obligation. In return for getting a license, I would like to say, in addition for getting a free education and a charter, and be regarded with respect, you are supposed to be self-sacrificing and look beyond the interest of yourself and your client to society as a whole. And the most wonderful part of my story is that when I did it, nothing bad happened. So this is a picture of Lamercier. And this sketch, when he was told, he was having dinner in a Chinese restaurant, and on the napkin, he sketched out what the building should look like. This thing is now framed and kept as a sort of, so this was a great. Okay, I think with that I've done. Where I got stuck. Okay, so that those are the acknowledgements. So thank you very much. I'm sorry if I've taken a little more of the time than you normally have, and I love for this type of thing, but thank you very much, and please stay safe. We are still not out of the woods. We are still there.
Thank you very much, Engineer Russell De Silva, for that informative and engaging presentation, which took us through the many aspects of professional ethics in the context of our engineering practice, and also for elaborating your points using examples of real-life cases. Thank you. We can now move on to any questions and the discussion session. We have one question in the chat box, and I would like to encourage our viewers to please submit your questions in the chat box. So if you would like to, you can always unmute yourself and ask these questions verbally. So I can just go to the first question by Engineer Rohana Dasanayaka, and he says in Sri Lanka, most of the unethical practices are basically bribery, and that there are many nice documents prepared, but very few professionals are following them. And in your opinion, why is this happening, and how can we overcome this situation? How can we practically implement the code of ethics in professionals' minds?
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Rohana. I mean, this is a $1 million question. We all talk about doing the right thing, but really the commitment has to come right from the top. Like now, this is how Singapore got over the issue, because right from Lee Kuan Yew, whatever the past was, he cracked down on all forms of corruption, and people began to fall in line. Punishments were severe. Unfortunately, we seem to encourage this. We have all sorts of underhand activities going on, and they still continue to go on. And the thing is, the amount of money being paid out becomes more and more with each year passes. So I think the training of children from their childhood, as somebody said, I think before we joined in Japan, like the schools also ethics is taught. But like I said, in Sri Lanka, we learn ethics from our childhood. Our parents teach us Dham, Pasal, and Sunday schools and all teach us this. When we go to school, we get values really, and values are the foundation for ethics. So unfortunately in school, these are not highlighted. It sort of dies. These are not stressed on. So if we can build up a culture, good ethical culture, and in the profession, in the industry, and enforce as you said, there are a lot of nice books, papers, and laws written about it. But how do you implement it? How do you Pandora Papers, for example, is highlighting various people, all the top people in the world, dumping their money all over the place. How they got that money, where they got it from? Obviously, not from selling tea or coconuts to somebody. So I think it's a hard fight. It's an uphill battle that we have to fight, but we have to somehow make somebody and somebody here means really the state has to take it on board to take a firm stand on squashing, and putting the brakes on corrupt activities. I hope
Thank
that,
you.
I mean, that is not really a answer to the solution, but that's the only thing I can think of at the moment.
Well, thank you very much, sir. We have another question from another engineer whose name is not given. It reads, while thanking Engineer Russell, I would like to ask him to throw some light on the following. With respect to engineering professionals who form the most important segments of engineering consultants, how does ethics apply? For example, how does ethics apply? For example, in the Southern Expressway section, beyond Matra was to be given out at rupees 8 billion during the government before 2015, but during the next government, it was given at 27 plus billion. How can this sort of thing happen under consortiums of consultants who are supposed to follow ethics?
Interesting question. I think the Godagama Pinnadua or the Pinnadua Godagama stretch, that is the Gaul Masara stretch, was originally also coming under the ADB part of the Kurunga Hatagma to Gaul. Gaul is Pinnadua, right? But somewhere down the line, the Chinese got into this picture, and at the moment the national trend is that anything the little yellow men bring is acceptable to us, and there are no EIAs, there are no questions asked, and prices are totally prices escalate. And really not that goes into the quality of the construction, but it goes into other area, other pockets, we want to put it that way, to be very blunt. The same with Umawaya also the same. I mean, what started as I can't remember the figures offhand, but as something ended up with almost triple the value. So a lot of these projects end up because of, and this is where I say the government, the state, or and these are all state projects being done for state sector organizations for the country. The government has to be firm and ensure that we get the best value for the money we spend. If we don't, we are cheating ourselves. We are cheating ourselves and future generations. Like guys like me are now on the way out. I mean, but you, the younger generation, right? You have to face them and your children, and because we are ending up with disasters. We are sitting on a hotbed of possible disasters. A lot of the projects you find, especially where, if to a great extent, if the AD, where people like the JICA, ADP, World Bank, USAID, AusAid, people like that are involved, even the Koreans to some extent, there is some control on the disbursement of funds. But when it comes to some of the other donors, there is absolutely no questions asked, it just goes out. So that is the only answer I can give. And again, I say the commitment has to come from the top, from the leaders of the country. Otherwise, we are going nowhere. We can only shout till we are blue in the face, but nobody is going to bother about it. I hope that. I mean, it's very hard. I can't give you a definite answer to this thing because it's sort of a.
Yeah, Engineer Russell, can I ask a small question?
Yeah.
Yeah, we generally blame politicians for all the corruptions, but I believe they can't do corruption without the support of civil servants or the professionals. In fact, there are evidence that our own engineers also doing some unethical practices.
Yeah.
My question is, can we use our code of ethics as a legal document?
The thing is, that's Engineer Nandan, is it?
Yeah, Nandana, yeah.
Yeah, the thing, we can, you see, the thing is for the code of ethics to be used for a start, somebody has to make a complaint. Somebody has to make a complaint. Now, and that is where the ISL comes in, and then if ISL investigates and finds that the person has done something wrong, they can, the worst case scenario is remove him from the ISL role. But they have no right to proceed with the civil action against the person. That has to come from the authority. Say if the person has done something illegal and is the ministry involved, lodges a complaint, or the organization lodges a complaint with the police or with the bribery and corruption, bribery organized, that's this thing that we have, then they can investigate and they get legal action. But the ISL per se cannot take any legal action against an offender.
Yeah, my question is, now suppose some party take legal actions against a professional, let's say an engineer at a court, can they use our code of ethics to convince that these professionals are violating the code of ethics?
Yeah, I think
by ISL,
I don't think a situation has arisen, but I think there is no problem. They can always say that the profession, as an engineer, you are bound, whether you are even as a student member of the institution, or a student or associate or chartered engineer, you are bound by the ISL code of ethics once you are a member, and you have to observe the requirements of the institution, right, and the ethical practices. So if you were to violate that, and that can be used by, say, the prosecuting counsel to say that the profession of this gentleman is a member, specifies that he has to behave in this manner, but he has violated it, and they can use that for the prosecution. And technically, if he is found guilty, the ISL should remove him from the role, from the, they have the right to remove him from the membership. I think we have never had cases like this being brought up. This is the unfortunate thing, where people have always chosen to, be the nice guy and ignore situations rather than, because everybody is known to everybody. I hope that, I don't know whether that answers your question, Nandana.
Yeah, thank you, Engineer Russell.
These are very, very lot of gray areas in this whole thing, and it's not like, specific equation or theory with regard to engineering problem. These are highly philosophical and very gray to.
Thank you, sir. The next question is also from an engineer whose name is not given. It reads, there are instances where certain engineers or consultants try to undercut an already appointed engineer to a project in a bid to grab the project from them. What is your view on such acts? And are there any professions in the IESL Code of Ethics or legal frameworks to address such issues?
That is actually, I didn't go into all of this, but for ISL, if you look at the clause 4, right, there are 10 sub-clauses, and that deals with, this type of situation where you don't undercut another engineer because you want a job. You can undercut him by going to, using influence. You can undercut him by spreading, I said, malicious stories about the person. You can, there are various ways you can use influence. So you don't do that. And this is covered in the ISL, the clause 4. It's, I think, it's one of the sub-clauses. It's covered about 2 or 3 of the sub-clauses. It also talks about misrepresenting your qualifications and experience. There are a whole lot of things. I think we have to call those because those are things that everybody should be aware of, and really these are things that should be practiced by any decent person. But unfortunately, we also find that there are the black sheep who might resort to this type of thing, this type of bad practice. But it is definitely covered in the ISL Code of Ethics. And if somebody is affected, they can make a complaint to the ISL, to the president. There is the procedure under the disciplinary procedures, where they can lodge a complaint, and the ISL can investigate and see whether there is a justification in the complaint and take action. But it's not legal in the sense that we cannot go to courts and that type of thing at the moment.
Thank you, sir. The next statement is actually regarding the previous question that you answered on using the Code of Ethics as a legal document. But I feel you have covered that already. And the next query is from engineer Gamini Ramavikrama. And he asks, can we, IESL and SSCSL, take initiative, take stern legal action against our members to send them behind bars or suspend them from any more practice? Can we draft a penalty code with legal sectors?
Yeah, like I said, Engineer Gamini, we at the moment we don't have, the ISL does not have that framework to take legal action. But if say the complaint comes from say the client organization and through the civil procedures, then legal action can be taken, and then this necessary disciplinary action could be meted out to the offender if proved guilty.
Thank you very much, Engineer Russell. So I think we have come to the end of the discussion session, and while thanking you once again for conducting it and answering all the questions, I would like to now invite the Honorable Secretary of the Society of Structural Engineers Sri Lanka, Engineer Ananda Senarath, to present the vote of thanks for today.
Thank you, Dylan. Good evening, everybody, my dear fellow engineers and ladies and gentlemen. It gives me an immense pleasure to deliver the word of thanks of this event to all of you who listen to the lecture. I would like to thank our presenter, Engineer Russell Silva, an eminent engineer who honored us by delivering this lecture by his knowledge and experience. Engineer De Silva delivered most relevant topic these days, which is not only relevant to engineering fraternity, but for the whole country. I would like to thank President of SSC, our council members who organized the lecture, and our sponsor, KD Piling Private Limited, one of the experienced piling contractor. And last but not the least, the participants for making this Q&A session as a grand success. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, sir. And with that, we can bring this session to a close. We wish you all a productive and safe week ahead. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Ananda, for.
Thank you. Thank you, Russell.
And throwing me in at the deep end.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Good night.
Good night for all.